We've all seen the Instagram graphics. You can't pour from an empty cup. Choose yourself. Protect your peace. And honestly, I've lived the burnout that happens when you don't listen to that advice. But lately, I've been wondering if we've accidentally built a new kind of prosperity gospel. Not for people wanting private jets, but for the Target shoppers of the world. A world where emotional comfort is the highest blessing, and boundaries are just a spiritual sounding way to avoid the people we're called to love. At what point does caring for yourself become an excuse to stop caring for others? And how do we tell the difference between a boundary that heals and a wall that hides? Today, we're asking, is your self-care actually just self-worship? My name is Nate. I'm joined by Tony. Welcome to the Easy Approach.
Take it easy. Take it easy.
All right, everyone. Welcome in to the Easy Approach. As always, I'm your host, Nate, and I'm joined by my co-host, Tony.
Hello. We have another super easy topic today. I think it's actually not that difficult, but there is a lot of interesting nuance, just like always.
Well,
right?
I think the question itself isn't difficult until people start getting real mad
Yes.
about it.
There we go.
Yeah.
And that's my favorite thing,
It's
pissing people
making
off.
people mad. That's what we're all about here at the Easy Approach. We take the easiest possible approach to tick you off.
Yes.
That's
Takes
what
a
it
lot of
means
effort.
in the subtext. That's right. And we're talking about self-care today.
Ooh.
We're talking about self-care. And we're talking, often we like to do pros and cons because so many different things that we end up discussing are not black and white.
Mhm.
Like there's a lot of good to the topic of self-care. It's like, should
Absolutely.
you care for yourself? Absolutely. So like this black and white issue. However, we want to ask, can self-care become a way of championing you to do whatever you want?
We're jumping right into it, guys.
That's right. Like, is there a point when caring for myself, like, is that a valid reason to stop caring for other people?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of a good discussion that can take place here because this is one of those areas where, yeah, Jay, there really is a lot of good, right? There's a whole lot of mental health issues, not just in society, but I feel like our generation, I feel like we've probably have pioneered mental health issues being commonplace, not the exception, but the norm,
Yeah.
And I say that jokingly, but this is also coming from someone who, speaking for myself, I strongly, strongly believe in healthy therapy. I really do. I think that there's something to be said about a professional who has gone out of their way to be trained in a course, because I am Christian. If that's a surprise to anyone at this podcast audience, I am Christian, so I do prefer my therapist to have more of a Christian perspective as opposed to a humanistic one. But I think that's really getting at it a little bit right there. Is that when does self care become a little bit humanistic in a negative sense, where it's not just, hey, let's take care of ourselves. Let's make sure that we become the best versions of ourselves. Let's continue to grow. But instead, can it happen in such a way that your self help that's intended for you to grow is the thing that's preventing growth?
Yeah.
Right? Is that another way of saying that?
Yeah, maybe. And I wanted to ask you this, like if I say self-care, what do you think? Like, how does that look for you? And like what space does that have in your life?
Yeah, for me, there are some topics where it's like, oh yes, this is 100% me. I struggle with this, and I won't be ashamed about that, and I won't back down from that, right? And there are other areas where it's like, I don't necessarily struggle in this area. And so I would say, for me, I've always been on the side of the spectrum, or maybe my personal struggles have been on the extreme, on the other extreme, where I did not have enough self care, where there was too much in my life, especially growing up, where it was to the level that I place other people above me. That's how humble I'm being, and how much humility and generosity that I have, right?
Yeah.
It's honestly kind of like a reverse pride without being prideful. It's kind of weird, but
Yeah.
there's a whole journey that took place for me there. But I say that to say that historically, I would have been better not falling into the extreme of not having enough self care, and working my way to the middle ground. But man, we know it that you can be on one side of an extreme in an efforts to solve that problem that is what you're focusing on in this moment, front and center. Without realizing it, you can swing to the other extreme, and all of a sudden you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater on the other side.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, I tend to kind of echo your experience.
Oh yeah, yeah.
My whole life has not been one of being like, I really have to stop using therapy speak to avoid things that are hard or sacrificial. That hasn't been my issue. My issue has been like burning myself out like completely
Yes.
from
Yeah.
not giving any kind of like care or regard to how I'm doing, like physically or mentally or spiritually. So I'll rephrase the question, or slightly. I'll ask like a follow up question. For you, Tony, what does it look like to self care or to care for yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot for me personally in my journey, it's recognizing lies in my life, and specifically lies that I have had a tendency of telling myself, or that I grew up around, that I never for a moment thought to question, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so because it did become very easy for me to prefer other people, I like no doubt about it. I know I have plenty of people in my life who I value highly, and they don't have these same struggles. They have it's hard to connect to other people's struggles. It's hard to have empathy for another person, right? And I don't know if having too much empathy is the right way to describe it, but it was very much I will recognize burnout in you. I will recognize when you are carrying too large of a burden on your shoulders. I will see that, and I will be at your aid. I will be at your side. I will be that friend for you, that person who is going to, you can call it 2 in the morning, right? And I will do it, consequences be damned, of my own personal self help, or self health, right? My own personal well being. And so I've had to learn the hard way. What's it look like to set healthy boundaries? What's it look like to identify, hey, this is what reality is, and I should be living my life and making my actions according to reality, and not just whatever lie I've been telling myself, that the other people deserve happiness or deserve X, Y, and Z positive thing, but I don't, you know?
Mhm.
But without a doubt, it's very I've seen it's very prevalent to weaponize self care and self help,
Yeah.
and to use it against other people
Yeah.
for your own benefit.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I have tended to be historically someone that wants to like the sense of like, I'm not gonna do that because I think it would be really bad for me. Like I'm at a
Mm.
point where I don't think I can give anymore right now safely. Like
Yeah.
that kind of language would be like growing up, and my perspective of that is like, no. Like
Yeah.
never,
Yeah. That's
never,
forward
never, never.
territory.
Like always give yourself, always go above and beyond.
Yes.
At any
Yeah.
point where you would be like, I can't do that, it's like, what do you mean you can't do? You can't.
Oh,
Yes, you
so
can.
you're not a good person.
That's right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'd definitely be on the other side of that, or leaning or defaulting to struggling with the other side of that extreme.
Yeah.
And let me just like throw this out there for anyone who resonates with that part of it,
Mhm.
because this is like a dual conversation. This is like part of it is confronting those of us that struggle with weaponizing self-care.
Mhm.
And then also confronting those of us who flee from self-care or view it as a weakness or as something negative.
Yeah.
Like, yes, we are called to love our neighbors. We're called to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, right?
That second part is what ruined me. Like I never paid attention to it much. And then when it got pointed out to me, it's like, you're not just called to love your neighbors. You're called to love your neighbors as yourself.
Yeah.
And it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So, whether you're a Jesus follower or not, basically almost everyone I've ever met at least views Jesus as an incredibly wise teacher. So I just think he's also the Son of God and the answer to all of humanity's problems. But even if you just view him as a wise teacher, he said, yes, you should love your neighbors as you love yourself. He put a high emphasis on there. It's like, those are two of the three most important things a human being can do, is love your neighbor, but also love yourself. So yes, we it's very important that we care for ourselves. And then Jesus himself modeled that. Like, you can read in his ministry, there are these repeated moments where he withdraws, like away from his followers and away from the crowds and the people who are looking for him. And he just goes off to like quiet, lonely places. And I think that was his way of, like, for him, that's what he needed. Like, he needed a recharge. He needed to get his head clear and to spend time in prayer and like basing himself and grounding himself. Like, that was his, like, loving himself. But it was something that enabled him to do the other things he needed to do. It wasn't something that he used like to get away from doing the things that he needed to do. He used that to maintain himself and prepare him for doing that stuff. So,
I'm sorry, but
no, go ahead.
I'm just going to interpret that for me. It's like, so in other words, it's self-care, or those actions or those moments that he took, they were for another purpose. They weren't for themselves in and of themselves. As far as self-care goes, it was always so that he could accomplish something else.
Yeah, I think the idea, at least for Jesus, the idea was like, love yourself, care for yourself, do what is good for yourself, but the ultimate good isn't yourself.
Yeah.
As like the highest, like, caring for me is the most important thing I can do as a human. Caring for you is a very necessary thing so that you can do all the things that you're made to do.
That's right. That's a better way of saying
if
it.
caring for you, I think, becomes something like, I care for me, and that is like the single most important thing in my life is caring about me. From a Jesus follower perspective, that is immediately very backwards. But even just from a worldly perspective, that's what you'd call solipsism. That's what you'd call like the world revolves around me. And most people don't want to say that outright. You know what I mean? Most people
But
don't
their
like
actions,
the idea that they, like, yes, I care about myself more than anyone else in the entire world. A lot of people wouldn't like to have that label put on themselves. But it is what you're saying, ultimately. If self-care becomes this thing you put on a pedestal, like, that is where you lay your offerings, that is where what you give your worship is, the altar of self-care. Like, ultimately, you are on the pedestal. So there's like these harsh extremes, like totally denying any kind of care for self. That just leads to burnout and anger and resentment. I was somebody that couldn't say no for a long, long, long time. I couldn't say no. I was like, if somebody asked me for something, I would like, I'm gonna do it because I'm being asked of it. And there's validity in helping people and being generous and being self-sacrificial. Now, once again, like, the way of Jesus is that love has no greater depiction than somebody willing to lay down his life, and by extension, his preferences, his desires, his etc., for the sake of his friend or his family or of those around him. There's crazy value to that. So it's both. There's both sides here, and once again, none of these issues. The reason why it's worth discussing is because there is a gray middle ground. There is a balance. There is a, like, navigating with wisdom. Both, I need to care for myself, but I also, like, that isn't the highest good, period. Like, the most important thing I can do is to care for me. But, I mean, like that definitely is a cultural narrative. If you spend any time, doom scrolling on any kind of like shorts, right? Um,
Mhm.
TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, um, Facebook Shorts. Are there Facebook Shorts? Is Facebook?
There's
I feel like
Facebook stories.
okay, yeah. I feel like all of them have some kind of like short video
Yeah.
form content
Yeah,
because
of course. Yeah.
that's what people are getting trapped in the loop of these days. But if, like, you spend enough time there, you're going to see something encouraging you at some level to see other people as like moving parts in the story of your own actualization. And
Mhm.
it's like other people, it's important to have other people in your life, but if they infringe upon your greatest good, which is ultimately like you are the main character,
Mhm.
you are you, and your life is the single most important thing, then you need to cut people out, like that it isn't caring for you for them to be in your life. And so that was my original question, is like at what point does, like on that side of the extreme, does at what point has caring for myself become a valid reason to say I don't have to care for others anymore because I care for myself?
Yeah, and I think talking about social media is a great example of a breeding ground for this kind of culture where essentially what can occur, or what does occur, is you either intentionally or unintentionally start creating vacuums, or you start creating echo chambers for yourself, right? Where it's like, yeah, I in the name of self-help, and maybe people don't say it or think that way, but essentially everyone and their dog is right? They're in the right. Whatever we can be talking about politics, we can be talking about Christianity, we can be talking about any uh, area where there is a matter of difference, and my subjective opinion is the absolute fact. And if you disagree with that, well, then it's not healthy nor wise of me to spend time around you, or to let your perspective or influence into my life. And it could be as simple as, and I'm not saying this is something that I have not done this, but it can be as simple as going to that person on Facebook and saying, I don't want to follow them anymore, or snooze that person for 30 days. It could be as tame as that, because what ends up happening is if you snooze enough people 30 days that you don't like their thoughts that are different than yours, it's just an echo chamber that now everything that's around me are people and thoughts and perspectives that, of course, are right, because that's what I believe. And I feel like that's not living in reality, you know?
I mean, it's funny because there is like the moment you say one side, the other side is like, well, wait a minute, like there's validity over here too, and
Yeah.
it's true. I think this is what makes it such a difficult conversation. Like there really are the
Yeah.
moments where there can be like boundaries are healthy, right?
Absolutely.
Like especially for me and like for my family, or for running, like for being a human and for having a family and whatever else, I can't have no boundaries to be a human being, and no boundaries for
Mhm.
my family. There's a way of setting that up healthily, but then where it ceases to be healthy is when it's just like, just listen to whatever you want to do. Like listen to your body, treat yourself. The self-care and protecting your own, that is the single most important thing you can do as a human being. Because on the other side, there's Jesus saying, I think it's Matthew 16. He says, deny yourself, right?
Mm.
Deny the things that you prefer and want. So, like, there's truth over here. Boundaries can be very, very valid and can be very, very important. But a boundary can also be something that totally disqualifies you from being a follower of Jesus. Because 1000%, Jesus, the act of following Jesus will require us to deny the things that we immediately prefer. Not always, but very often. So I think you know how in Monopoly there's that, like, you land on go to jail, and you go to jail, but then you can get out of jail if you pull the card.
Get
You know
out
what
of
I
jail
mean?
free.
The get out of
Get out of
jail
jail
free
free
card.
card. Yeah.
I feel like, and I feel like I've encountered this one too many times over the last handful of years, where people use the self-care, or they use therapy speak. So boundaries,
Yeah.
capacity, emotional labor as a get out of following Jesus free card. Like, okay, like, are there times when you need to have a boundary? Are there times where you've hit your limit? Yes, clearly 100%. But
Mm-hmm.
at what point does that become I don't have to do anything I don't want to do
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to do it. And that is an infringement on my capacity. It is an infringement upon my safety or my boundary or whatever else. And I'll say it again. This is why this is, I think, an important conversation to have and start wrapping our brains around, because it really is in the nuance. It's like, how do you navigate with wisdom, whether I am somebody that denies myself healthily or someone that denies myself unhealthily? How do I evaluate whether I'm drawing a healthy boundary that will protect me and my family, or using that as a justification to do whatever I want, whenever I want it?
Yeah, yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And for me, the way that I understand it, or the way that I would encourage and challenge our listeners to think about, is it's the concept that, all good things can be used for bad or can be turned bad, right? That there can be a lot of good in therapy. There could be a lot of good of setting up boundaries. God knows that I've needed it in my life. You've needed it in your life. But when do we allow those good things to become a crutch? When all of a sudden, yes, we were at one point working on ourselves and trying to put ourselves in a better spot, right? But now, because we have leaned on this crutch for so long, and we are not using the crutch to get better, to get to a point where we no longer need a crutch, but we are whole and healthy and moving forward without depending on something that maybe in a season we was good and was something that we needed to depend on in that season. But once that season comes to an end and you're still using that crutch, all of a sudden you go from healthy growth to stagnant, where you're not going to grow anymore. You're not going to allow that outside feedback that you disagree with. And yeah, it can be a moment, especially for those who are Christian listening to us, where it can be really easy to slip into yeah, that's good for other people, but I don't want to do that myself because it's just not good for me right now. And it's like, how much of that is true? How much of that is a crutch that we're leaning on for far too long?
Yeah, we talked about Jesus and having these moments where he exhibits or he
Mm-hmm.
displays loving himself, caring for himself, and enabling him
Yeah.
to do the continued hard work. I think in Luke chapter 5, there's a good example where he just, like, people are looking for him, like they're demanding his attention constantly,
Yeah.
and I believe it says that he woke up before any of them, and he got out of there. Like he went to some place. He went to like a desolate place, a lonely place where there was nothing. And we're given the sense that he's away. He doesn't stay away for a week or a month or whatever. He's like away from them for X amount of hours, and
Mm-hmm.
they're looking for him. His followers, the crowds, are like, "Where is he? Where is he? We want more of him." And he's like, "No, he's over here. They can't find him. He's taking that time for himself." But then he comes back to them. Like X amount of hours later, he goes back to the work. Like he's gotten what he needs. He's gotten what he needs in order to continue to sacrifice of self, to give of self, in order to not become like a burned out servant of Yahweh, right?
Yeah.
There's a real validity to the idea that a burned out follower of Jesus is useless to the kingdom.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I have been there. Like I've burned myself out multiple times. I'm sure you have as well. I'm sure many of you guys listening have been the ones burned out. But on the flip side, well, when does, like, I'm listening to my body or I'm listening to my heart become more authoritative than listening to the Spirit or obeying the words of Jesus?
Mm.
You know, I think
Yeah.
about I think about the concept of rest and taking time to regenerate and restore and that kind of thing. I think about the Sabbath in the Old Testament, which is a like command, right? Like it's like a fundamental command that God gave to the Israelite people to take 1 day out of 7 to not work. And intentionally with the language of like, on this day, you're going to rest. You're going to rest with God. You're going to remember the different things that God has done for you. You're not going to do anything, any striving, any hard work or whatever else. You're going to just rest. But is that the same thing as like, man, I'm just taking a vacation from God and from all God's people. Like I'm getting out of here. Or it's an action of reorienting like mind and heart and time as an act of trust, not as an act of just escape.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole goal of Sabbath is so you can go back to the next 6 days.
Yeah.
So you can jump back in and then have that 6 days where you're going. And not just going, but like the 6 days where you're facing down all the responsibilities and all the things that you need to do and that you're called to do by God. Now, 1 day is meant to set you up for the other ones, but it's not 1 day where you escape and you don't go back to anything.
Yeah, you're not disengaging from life.
Yeah, it's a command to rest with God and then like prepare for the next week. Like just be ready, like physically and mentally and spiritually to go back in. And so, question: are you familiar with the prosperity gospel?
Unfortunately.
What is for the sake of our listeners, define what the prosperity gospel is?
The way that I would high level sum this up, and I feel like you see it a lot or more often than not when it comes to mega churches. And this is not to say that there aren't good mega churches out there with thousands and thousands of members, or every big church is bad. And it's not even to say that the big churches that definitely fall prey to this are completely bad, right? But there is this idea that if you're a good Christian and you're a good believer in Jesus and you put, everything that's inside of you, you hand it to Jesus and you trust Jesus, well, then things are going to go good for you. God's going to bless those who bless him. God's going to make sure that as a Christian, all your obstacles are going to be removed from life. And I think the simple reality is that becoming a Christian, believing in God, believing that Jesus is a historical person who actually told the truth about reality, isn't a magic trick. It doesn't magically make all your woes and struggles and problems disappear and never show up on your front door ever again. In the prosperity gospel, they kind of like to live in not reality, in my opinion.
So let me ask you an inflammatory question, and I've made this inflammatory on purpose. Nice. Is self-care the prosperity gospel for people who shop at Target? Isn't that pithy?
Ooh.
Isn't that inflammatory?
Good question.
We should make that the title. That's got too many words to be the title. Which one of you shops at Which one of you shops at Target? I know you're out there.
Leave a comment. Let us know. Timestamp. Hey, I get my Taylor Swift albums from my loving wife from Target. I'll have you know.
Oh, dang! You guys are the ones. You're the Target listener.
Yeah, there you go. The Target co-host.
Yeah. Anyway. Well, so okay. The prosperity gospel brings in a whole demographic of people that are looking to Jesus because of what he can give to them, right?
That's a really good way of saying that. Yeah.
So, and the give, it revolves around material wealth and often also physical health. But there's a material benefit, whether material in body or material in material, right? In objects, in wealth. The reason I would even begin to make this comparison, and just to clarify, not painting, and I hope we've been clear up to this point, but there's not a black and white here. There are extremes on both ends. But on the
Yes.
extreme end of self-care being put on a pedestal, has self-care in some ways become the new prosperity gospel for people who are looking not to a televangelist to solve all their health and money problems, but for people who are looking for emotional well-being.
Mhm.
In other words, this kind of newer wave of interpreting what Jesus has to offer. Are we looking to Jesus and saying, what can you give me in terms of emotional health?
Mm-hmm.
And if we are, and at the times when we are, then it makes a lot of sense that we would buck against anything that would feel like sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because just like the prosperity gospel, if it is about what I'm getting money-wise or health-wise, in the same way, I think if self-care is the primary thing that we're hoping Jesus contributes to, then anything that feels like laying something down of myself or pouring out of myself is going to feel like the opposite of Jesus. If our lens is looking at Jesus through what he's going to give to me. Now, does Jesus have something to offer for your self-care?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, no doubt about it. But it's not to the exclusion of those around you, because it's not just you; it's everyone, right?
Yeah.
It's his what he's trying to describe to people is a reality, not just made up magic that's going to work for the person who says the prayer the right way. They get to cast the Harry Potter wand to all of a sudden get all the money and everything else that a prosperity gospel would normally have. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Like in today's culture, it's let's cast the Harry Potter wand to magically feel better and to conquer any mental health issue. I would take it a step further and say that it's a magic wand to cast to get away or make a valid excuse for a selfish behavior that maybe they should not be having, especially if they confess to be a follower of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think Jesus cares deeply about our emotional health, right?
Yeah,
But is
absolutely.
it the single most important thing as a human that you feel emotionally healthy all the time?
Yeah, because
Um,
at the end of the day, it's not about us in and of ourselves.
yeah.
Not
You know,
It's about us and God, but not us only.
yeah. Like, are there times where you want things that you shouldn't have?
Yeah,
Are there times when what you want is less important than other things right now? And
absolutely.
Jesus absolutely demonstrated this, where he teaches us in the Lord's Prayer to align ourselves with this basic idea that, like, God, would your will be done?
Yeah, not mine, but yours.
Right. And then he embodies that himself in before his arrest and crucifixion in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he prays, like, Father, I don't want to do this.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he's like weeping, and he's like he's sweating blood, like he's so stressed out about what is about to happen. He so deeply doesn't want to do this. He says, if this cup could pass from me, can we not do this, God? But ultimately, not my will, but yours.
That's right.
Because what he's showing there is a trust that, like, the preferences in the moment are not always going to be the truth. Or they're not
Mm,
always going to be the path to the greatest good. That the only will, the only person's will that we can trust completely is God's will. Even if that means experiencing hardship in the moment, that God's will for us in the grand scheme is much more worth trusting than our preference in that moment.
mhm, mhm.
So, it's like, Paul says in Galatians, let's not grow weary of doing good.
Mm,
Like, there's an acknowledgement that we are going to get weary,
yeah,
but the answer isn't necessarily just to stop. And yes, there are many times where you're going to have to step away, and boundaries can be healthy. And you need to like build periods of rest and self-care to prepare yourself for the next, like, so you don't grow weary of doing good. But there's always the going back and doing good again, right?
Yeah.
There's always that like next thing, like
Mm.
I'm ready. What is it that Michael Scott says? Like, no doubt about it, I am ready to get hurt again. I felt that way, and quoted that out of context with a whole lot of things, where I've had many points in my life where I've poured out, and I've sacrificed for other people, and felt empty.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like I had hit rock bottom, and I was like, I don't have anything left to give. And there are points where it's like, okay, I'm empty. I've got to get a little bit of distance here, because I'm burning myself right the heck out.
Mm-hmm.
But there was always another point, and maybe it was hours later, maybe it was a day later, maybe it was a few days later or a week later. At one time I burned out so hard from not building any kind of like processing with God, or times with God, or times of rest in my life. I burned out so hard it was like a month. It was like 6 weeks where I was like, I don't want to see another human. I have no love in me left at all. I have nothing left in me.
Yeah.
But
it's easy to just shut down.
yeah, and I was shutting down because I so poorly like built self-love and self-care into my like day-to-day life. But
Mhm.
after that period of like spending a lot of time with God and processing and resting and sleeping, I was like, all right, no doubt about it. I'm ready to go out there and pour out again. Like I'm ready to go get hurt again. And it's like, yeah, you're in the, there's going to be discomfort and pain when it comes to serving other people, when it comes to pouring out, when it comes to giving and sacrificing. But the solution is not, I don't want to be uncomfortable anymore, and therefore it's not safe for me to do this ever again.
Mhm.
Man, I'm really grateful that Jesus didn't care more about his personal safety than he cared about me.
Yeah.
And that might sound melodramatic, but there's real truth in that idea that the highest good isn't my safety at any given moment. There are
That's right.
times when that is exactly what I should prioritize, and prioritize that for my family. But if I'm only ever prioritizing my safety, if my boundaries always result in me being more comfortable and less involved in other people's messes, that isn't a
Mhm.
boundary. That's a wall.
That's a wall. Yep. Yep.
So I want to ask you, Tony. It's great to talk about this whole thing, okay? But what do we do? Like there's
Mhm.
the extreme over here and the extreme over there. But how do we walk the line?
Mhm. So for me, there are two things that pop up in my mind from what you were just saying to answer that question. And I do, I very grateful for our audience who do listen to us. And so this is one of those topics that if you feel convicted here, just know that you're not the only one. Like we are all in this together. And so when Nate says, when he calls out the idea of when Jesus says, nonetheless, it's your will, God. It's not my will, but it's yours. I think that there's a level of gravity there that's huge. And I think that there's a lot of the middle ground lives under that statement where at the end of the day, it's it's acknowledging that God cares about us. Yes, it's acknowledging that God's not just this big bad thing that just wants to squish us like ants because he's capable of doing that. But more importantly, it's understanding who God is, I think has a lot to do with it. I think in order to find the middle ground, taking efforts to go deeper in your discipleship, I really want to encourage anyone. Like that's a really good direction to go here. Less quantitative time into the self-help books and more qualitative time into the word, and even books that can help you understand what these deeper mysteries of what Jesus is saying, because we believe, at least at this podcast, that everything that Jesus is saying does apply to our day-to-day life. And so when Jesus in his life says, look, I do prefer these things. This is my comfort zone. It's not necessarily wrong for someone to have a comfort zone. It's not wrong at all. Like we all want to have a good and not torturous life on a day-to-day basis. But when he says, it's your will though, that matters the most, not mine. He's not saying that to someone who is untrustworthy. He's not saying, hey, I'm going to let you drive the car, even though you drive like a maniac, and who knows what's going to happen if I'm not in control. He's saying, I can trust you. I can trust that even though I don't know what turn you're going to take when you're driving the car, that you're going to get us to our destination way better than I ever could. And so there's a level of trust that exists in that middle ground that could really only take place when you dig deep and you don't sit in a place of comfort where you're surrounded by the walls that you built, just like what you were saying, Nate.
Yeah.
But instead, you move past those walls into a risky area. Look, I'm going to raise my hand on this. This is exactly where I'm at right now. That I have to understand that sometimes, a lot of the times, the risk is worth the growth. And if you're too afraid or you're too obsessed with the risk of the unknown, then you're going to do yourself a disservice and you're going to stunt your growth. And you can build up, the more that you're sitting still, you can build up those walls. They're not boundaries anymore. There are walls that you place brick by brick every moment that you are sitting there doing nothing and refusing to grow.
Yeah, that's well put. I have been kind of trying to roll this around in my head. What is the path forward into to writing that line between glorifying self-help or worshiping self-care as the end all be all, and then on the other hand, neglecting it entirely? And I think I kind of have three basic questions that I think we can ask ourselves, and for you listeners out there, this would be a good thing to write down if you're also searching for that balance point. But we always try to have landing gear as we land the plane here.
Absolutely.
Something we can walk away from or walk away with on the easy approach. And so I have three basic questions that we can ask ourselves when we are wrestling over whether to prioritize self-care and whether we're leaning too far over here or too far over there. And here's the first one. Does this move me toward God or toward isolation? Because there's a massive difference between solitude and isolation. I think the goal of solitude is exactly what Jesus demonstrates in his life. It's pulling away from the crowd to be with God. Yeah. It's active, and it's something that fills the tank, right? Jesus goes to the mountain to pray. And then the goal of solitude is to return to your community more whole than you left. Isolation, I think, is the trap, because that's where you pull away from everyone just to be away. And it's passive and often fueled by like something more like shame or like, I'm done. I'm done with people. And I think the litmus test for this one is when you're done with your self-care moment as a way of evaluating, do you feel more connected to God and to your purpose? Or do you feel more lonely and walled off? And I think that's a good little Rorschach test of whether your self-care helped you or hurt you in the end. So that first question is, does this move me toward God or toward isolation? And the second one is, are you avoiding a person or are you avoiding a pattern? And I think it's about avoidance versus strategy. And when you're avoiding a person, I think that's when self-care becomes the get out of jail free card, get out of following Jesus for free card for like a messy relationship. Because it's like you're skipping the small group because that one guy's annoying, or using your wellness as a shield against the messy parts of loving your neighbor. But then there's avoiding a pattern. And I think that's legitimate stewardship, because you can have those moments where you realize that every time you say yes to a certain kind of thing, you end up like blowing up at your family. Or you realize that every time you go down this path, or every time you sacrifice in this way, it results in this damaging experience or whatever else. So there's a real difference between avoiding a person and avoiding a destructive cycle or especially even a destructive cycle of burnout.
Mm-hmm.
So the word, I think the litmus test for this one is, are you resting because you're tired, or are you resting because you're afraid of confrontation or afraid of a difficult duty? There really is a difference between being tired, like I'm tired and I need some rest so I can do this, versus I don't want to do it. I want to get away from that.
Yeah.
So the first one was, does this move me toward God or toward isolation? The second one was, am I avoiding a pattern or a person? And then finally, and this might be the most important one in my mind, is this replenishing me to serve? Or is this replacing me serving? And it's like where ultimately, the question is, where is your energy going to be going in the end?
Yeah.
If rest and if self-care is about like restoring energy and restoring focus and restoring peace, like what is that all ultimately going to be funneled to? And if it's about replenishing, I think that's a really like a fantastic and extremely important goal. It's like you go for a nap, you go for a hike, or you sit in silence so that you have the capacity to love your spouse or to serve your church or to love your neighbors or to do your work with excellence tomorrow. Like the rest there is a means to an end, like we talked about with the Sabbath. There's a real difference between replenishing and replacing, because when you replace your service with self-care, the self-care is the end in and of itself. Like you've replaced the way of Jesus with the way of the consumer, which is like your life becomes then like this series of recovery sessions from life. And I guess it becomes a series of recovery sessions from a life you aren't actually living. So the litmus test there is, am I resting so that I can give again? Or am I resting because I'm done giving? And there is a difference.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, and you might hit a point where you are so fried, that you can't think of it either way. And you can't even evaluate it right now. But like for a follower of Jesus, the end goal is to get out there again.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you can't think of it today, but maybe you can think about it tomorrow or in a few days. Jesus is trying to ultimately get you back on your feet. So I think in the end here, it's like self-care for a follower of Jesus is not just vacationing from calling.
Mm.
It's stewarding. It's stewarding capacity so that we can fulfill what we're called to. And if your wellness and your safety makes you less like Jesus, it might not be care. It might just be a comfortable series of walls or a cage that you've built for yourself.
Yeah, I think a cage is a great analogy there, because you really are just at the end of the day, you're hurting yourself. You're stunning your own growth. You're preventing your own development of maturity, emotional, intellect, spiritual. And yeah, I think that what you're saying, Nate, just the idea of being able to replenish, to put yourself into a place to serve others. I think that's it's a huge thing. I think so many people, the word serve does not come naturally. And I'm not just saying like in and of itself, the idea of serving at your church, right? Which is one aspect of it. But when you love your neighbor, when you love your spouse, your family member who gets on your nerves, when the board game night, when things can explode, but instead you prefer someone else, you prefer others over your own preference, that's what serving looks like. And that can be really hard, you know? Like that doesn't come natural to I think any of us. And so without a doubt, guys, if you are isolating, like what Nate said, and you find yourself in a spot where it's just you inside of this cage and there's not really anyone that you have allowed yourself to be vulnerable with, because you have all this built up knowledge of all this hard work that you've done with self care or any form of that unfortunately has been weaponized. It hasn't just been weaponized at other people, it's been weaponized against yourself. It's a dagger, it's a sword at your own throat. So yeah, I think it can be really slippery, Nate. I think it can be really easy, especially for a Christian, but even people who aren't Christians, to fall into that place where they've taken this good thing and now it is capturing them.
Human beings have a way of taking a good thing and making it the ultimate thing.
Right? Yeah, the ultimate thing. That's right.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, man. Good conversation as always, Tony. Thank you for joining me for wrestling with this idea.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for joining us. Tune in next time where we will inevitably be tackling another difficult question. Maybe it'll be in the Bible, or maybe it'll be something like this that everybody deals with at some level or another. But you can count on us to take the easy approach one way or the other. And until next time, take it easy.
Easy.